I think it's really important that we take a moment, and Uda did some of this, and I want to reflect on where we've come, because I think it's really important to honor where we've come. Not that long ago, most treatment were episodes of care, and now we are having significant conversations about somebody's recovery pathway and how treatment and recovery fit together and work together hand in hand to help somebody move into a recovery lifestyle. That's a fundamental change. Understanding opioid use disorder is a fundamental change that is taking place. Understanding MAT in MAT medications is a fundamental change, and the ability, and we've got some doctors here that'll talk about that, but the ability to distinguish what's the right medication for the patient and that. I think fundamental change is in how we are doing business. Providers have had to reevaluate the abstinence-only model. Your conversation has been, well, if you come to drug treatment, it's abstinence only. And people have had to say, well, wait a second, if this medication helps somebody manage so they can actually do treatment, why would we not do that? Uda talked about that. We also have enhanced medical staff. There's an increased amount of medical staff for providers across the entire state, which has been a phenomenal addition. Do we need to do something? Okay. Oh, a phenomenal addition as a result of these funds coming into Florida. And also the movement into emergency departments. Remember, the first time we did this, one of the things we learned is the patients weren't coming from jails anymore. These patients were sitting on gurneys in emergency departments, and we had to figure out, well, how do we get there? How do we make the connection to these patients? One of the other things we've learned is how to engage with addiction physicians and how to use addiction physicians to help you build your practice. One of the things we've learned is a greater understanding of the value of somebody with lived experience in utilizing peers across all levels of treatment. Everybody's not doing that, but there's this great movement that is taking place right now. Something else we've learned is uncoupling the commerce of treatment and recovery residences. And over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of work done, especially in the South Florida corridor, to draw distinctions between where somebody lives and where somebody gets treatment, and uncoupling that connection. Certification of peers is something that has happened, and building recovery communities, RCOs. Wes will talk about that. We've got a project going. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening in Florida that wasn't happening just a few years ago. I think one of the other things that's happened is we've begun a serious public conversation about stigma reduction. Dramatic. I wondered whether that would happen in my career, and it's happening. When they were promoting a bill, the peer bill, which we'll talk about, but they were promoting the peer bill in the Florida legislature last week, and a representative, I'll remember her name, but she presented the bill, and then somebody stood up behind her and said, "I've been in recovery for 20 years. Trust me, 5 years ago, we would have not had legislators standing up and talking about being in recovery." We have made tremendous progress in the conversation about addiction, substance use disorder, a medical condition, etc. Public awareness has increased. I mean, think about it. You barely, it's flattened out a little bit, but you can barely read the New York Times, the Washington Post, and even your local newspaper, watch the evening news. Donald Trump today is at an addiction conference in Atlanta talking about everything the federal government is doing to address this issue. That never happened before. Presidents didn't go to those conferences and make those presentations. And Obama was there 2 years ago, and Trump is there. And I mean, so there's just this fundamental shift. And then also partners working together. I see greater participation taking place between the providers, the managing entities, the agency, our association, the certification boards. Everybody's kind of gets that we're all in this together, and everything rises if we all work together to make that happen. That's not saying we don't have issues. Trust me, we know we have issues. So what are some of the challenges that we still have? Here's the big one that Uda talked about. There is the funding for substance abuse in this state. 110 million, 30%, 36% is federal block grant. We're going to get that. About 120 million is general revenue. Hopefully, we will retain that. 25% of our budget right now is federal money. 25%. And that 25%, if we can't build a case for it, will go away. So we have got to address that, and we'll talk more about that today. I sit on the national board of the National Council, and one of the very coolest things that happened to me was we had a meeting in June of 17, and we were talking about this STR money that got out. And I was able to say, oh yeah, here's what we did with our STR money. And I had the whole one-page summary. And I said, and the providers got it May 1st. And all the other states were looking at me like, what? Because some of them, it took them over 18 months to get those funds out. So Florida just did an incredible job, and we have to thank the agency for that. We have to thank the governor, Scott, at the time, for his executive order, which freed up the money being available. But that is a challenge. Engagement and retention of patients in treatment. If you remember, those of you that were here last time, and Stephanie's going to cover this a little later, but there was a significant number of patients who either left on their own or left administratively, and we want to talk about that today. We want to talk about what are we doing to be able to hold on to those patients. We have to ask the question, which we will today, do you have program rules, policies about you can only be on this medication this long, you have to do this step before you can do this step, if you get 3 dirty urines, you're out of here. I mean, we have to talk about those, and we'll begin that conversation in just 2 minutes.
Remember, it's positive urines, not dirty urines.
Positive urines. Sorry. Sorry. Thank you. It's always nice to be corrected by one of your board members. Honoring patient choice is another challenge. How do we honor patient choice? You know, where's this fine line between what we want them to do in treatment and what they want to do in treatment, and how do we honor that? I was at a meeting of peers 2 weeks ago, and one of the things they said was, you know what, it would be really nice in some agencies if the peers were more than van drivers. How do we fully embed peers as part of the professional workforce? Efficient management of the medications. We're going to talk about that today. What's the, you know, because we're capped in funding, 76 million seems like a lot of money, but we're capped. Because if you put somebody on a medication, you can't take them off tomorrow. So those patients are on, and then you put new patients on, and they're on the medications, and then you put new patients on, and all of a sudden you're at a cap. You've used up your funds. So we want to talk about what are some strategies people are doing to manage that. Obviously, the methadone rule has been a challenge in terms of being able to increase methadone capacity. And background screening has been a challenge, not only for your professional staff, but certainly for your peer staff. In trying to get them, we have legislation today that has passed the House, 2 bills, a Cindy Stevenson's bill and Caruso bill, that make it easier to get exemptions and take some charges off the table for even consideration. And they're both sitting in Senate in appropriations committees, and we have 1 week and 3 days left of the legislative session to get them out of the appropriations committees and through the floor in the Senate and passed. Last year, we had the exact same legislation, and it died 8 minutes with the session left. So, I have to tell you, Uda and I have had this conversation. Every place we go, different venues, what are the issues? Housing, background screening, housing, background screening, housing, background screening. We hear it every single place we go. And it doesn't matter if we're talking to professionals, to peers, to courts, it's always the same thing.